If you've ever tried to will yourself into a good habit, drinking more water, exercising regularly is a pretty common one, maybe stretching in the morning, you've probably discovered the same thing that I have. Willpower is unreliable. Dr. Roy Baumeister, who coined the term ego depletion, says that willpower is a limited resource that becomes weaker with overuse, especially as decision fatigue sets in. By the way, if you're curious, ego depletion explains the state where self-control becomes impaired due to the depletion of limited mental resources. So you have too much going on in your brain, you've made too many decisions, you are mentally worn down, and you're more likely to exercise less self-control and, eat the donut or grab fast food or leave your clothes all over the floor. Or maybe your kids even know that that's the best time to ask for something because you're just mentally worn down and you're more likely to say yeah, it's fine, just go ahead. But research has found time and time again that willpower works the same way. It can be worn down. But here's the thing, your environment doesn't get tired. It doesn't need motivation, and that's really what makes it such a powerful tool. You may have heard of Dr. B.J. Fogg, the author of the book Tiny Habits. He is a Stanford behavioral scientist, and he says that there are only 3 things that we can do to create lasting change: have an epiphany, change our environment, or change our habits in tiny ways. And I'd say of the 3 of those, changing your environment is probably the easiest, most low barrier way to go. So instead of trying to force better habits through mental effort, we can design our surroundings to automatically support them. So let's talk about how to do that. The first way is to design your default. The human brain is wired to favor defaults. We want things to be as easy as possible. So whether it's your morning routine or the way that you load the dishwasher, we follow patterns that require the least amount of effort to repeat, the path of least resistance. This idea shows up in behavioral economic research as the default effect. This is the tendency to go with preset options just because changing them takes energy. I'm sure you know what that feels like. There's even a study in 2003 that showed that countries who had an opt-out system for organ donation, that's where people are automatically registered as organ donors unless they actively choose to opt out, consistently had higher donation rates compared to those that had an opt-in system where the people had to actively register their consent to donate. Nobody really wants to take the extra steps, whether it's opting in or opting out, so whatever is set as the default is more likely to happen. Now apply that to your space. If your salad spinner is buried in a low cabinet behind your crock pot, you're less likely to use it. If your journal is shoved in a drawer instead of resting on your nightstand, it's less likely to get opened. Dr. Wendy Wood, who wrote the book Good Habits, Bad Habits, and she's a professor of psychology at USC, says, eye level is bi level. Speaking of department stores and the fact that we're far more likely to grab something that's directly in our line of sight. And she also says that 43% of our daily behaviors are habit-based, not decision-based. So that means that almost half of your life runs on autopilot, driven by your surroundings. So instead of hoping you'll remember to make a good choice, or hoping that you'll have the willpower to make a good choice, place the good choice directly in your path. And that's really what environmental design is all about, designing your environment to tailor to the life that you want. Want to drink more water? Keep a full water bottle where you can see it on your desk or by your bed. If you want to stretch in the morning, lay out a mat the night before. You've heard these things before, right? You want to take vitamins? Leave them next to your toothbrush instead of shoved away in a cupboard. Create your default. The second way is to hide the distractions. So just like your environment can support good habits, it can also quietly sabotage them. This is where something called cue exposure becomes the problem. I'm sure you've heard of Pavlov and the classical conditioning research that was done. Environmental cues trigger our habitual responses, even if we're not aware of it. So that means that just seeing your phone can trigger a scroll. Just smelling coffee can make you hungry for pastries. One study from Cornell found that women who keep soft drinks visible on their counters weighed an average of 24 to 26 pounds more than those who did not. Cereal visibility correlated with a 20-pound weight gain difference. The study was performed by Dr. Brian Weinsink, who found that your grandma is right. What we see is what we eat. Convenience is one of the most powerful drivers of consumption. And the same goes for habits beyond food. If your phone is always face up beside you, your thumb will reach for it. If the remote lives on the couch armrest, it becomes a magnet. If clutter dominates your workspace, your brain stays overstimulated, leading to lower focus and higher stress. What you see matters. So the move here isn't discipline, it's design. You don't have to throw anything away. You just really need to make your distractions harder to access than the habit you're wanting to lean into. You can even do this on your technology, especially on your cell phones. Hide the things that just suck you in that aren't what you're wanting to be spending your time doing, and put the apps that you really want to be participating in on the home screen. So you have to actually take a few extra steps to get to the other ones and type in the name or pull up the app scroll or, all the things that you actually do want to spend more time doing have less friction and they're right there, and bonus points if it's aesthetically pleasing. Sometimes the most effective form of self-control is simply choosing not to fight the battle at all. Preach. Number 3 is to give every habit a home. Your brain likes to link physical spaces with behaviors. That's why you instantly get sleepy in your bed if you're lucky, or feel alert when you walk to your favorite coffee shop. So if you want to work on a habit, whether you're talking about journaling, stretching, meal prepping, it helps to assign it a physical home. So you could create a dedicated corner for creativity that just makes you feel a little bit more inspired just being in that space. Or set up a small tray for vitamins and morning rituals. Or designate a no-clutter surface so that it's actually possible to cook without frustration. James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, is really big on one habit, one home. If you've ever tried to meditate in a pile of laundry, or meal prep in a cluttered kitchen more likely, then you know context matters. We associate spaces with behaviors. There's something called context-dependent memories, and this just says that we recall and respond to information better in the environment where it was learned or performed. In other words, your brain files actions with their locations. One study found that people were more likely to recall specific details when they returned to the same physical context where that memory was performed. So that just kind of makes sense, right? You see it in detective movies all the time. Take them back to the scene of the crime and see if that helps to jog some memories, because our brains are very location linked. And this has big implications for habit building. When your brain links a certain space with a certain habit, doing that habit becomes easier. I mentioned the author of Good Habits, Bad Habits earlier, Dr. Wendy Wood. She says it's contextual cues, not intention, that drive much of our daily behavior. When we repeat behaviors in the same setting, the context begins to cue the response automatically. That's why giving your habits a dedicated home in your environment is such a powerful move. Even a small visual marker, like a tray, or a chair, or a candle, can help to signal that this is where this thing happens. If you're somebody who forgets to water plants, like I have historically been, keeping a watering can on top of the windowsill right next to all of the plants helped me to build the habit of remembering whenever I'm in that space that, oh yeah, I need to water all of these plants. Because I see the watering can right there, we're good to go. Okay, number 4 is to shrink the startup cost. Prep work can kill your motivation before you even begin. When there's a friction point, usually it's something ridiculously small like the blender isn't clean, or your shoes are in the other room, or your favorite notebook is missing. I can't journal without my favorite notebook. This is known in psychology as activation energy, the amount of effort it takes just to start a task. It was first introduced in the context of chemistry, like how much energy a reaction needs in order to begin, but behavioral scientists now use it to describe why even small obstacles can totally shut down an action. You can see it mentioned in books now like Sean Anker's book, The Happiness Advantage, where he says if you can reduce the activation energy required to start a task, you're much more likely to follow through with it. So that's why set it and forget it systems are so powerful. If the first step of your habit feels effortless or is already half done, you'll move forward without needing a motivational speech. Some practical ways to lower your habit startup cost could be to keep the tools needed for that task visible and ready. That's the whole idea of leaving your journal open or leaving your yoga mat out or your shoes by the door. But another way would be to batch prep friction points. So the things that you know are going to be more challenging and you're not going to want to do, try to get all of those done initially so that you don't have to worry about it later. And another thing you can do is to automate tiny routines. That could be something like setting calendar reminders or using app shortcuts or, preparing your space the night before. That could be an automated routine. Dr. BJ Fogg, author of Tiny Habits again, calls this designing for simplicity. He says that when something is easy to do, you're far more likely to do it. Simplicity changes behavior. I love that. Even rituals like making tea, if they require boiling water, taking out a strainer, and, finding the right blend, it becomes harder to sustain. But if you put your favorite mug, kettle, and a jar of loose tea that you already love on a tray, Suddenly it feels inviting instead of draining. So the takeaway is, don't just think about what habit you want to build. Ask yourself, what's the first obstacle? And then you can tweak your space so that it's no longer there. And the fifth way to set your space up to build good habits without willpower is to just let your space nudge you. Silent nudges shape your day. How can you make your spaces whisper the right next step? This is all about visual cues. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment for clues on how to behave. And even small things like a book on your pillow or a pair of sneakers by the door, we've talked about, can totally power your next move. This is the central idea to nudge theory by economist Richard Thaler. I've mentioned him before. I like some of his studies. And his legal scholar Cass Sunstein, I think it is. And they define nudge as a small feature in the environment that subtly guides behavior without forcing it. Nudge theory, remember that one. If you want the direct quote, it's a little more wordy, but they said a nudge is any aspect of the choice architecture that alters people's behavior in a predictable way without forbidding any options or significantly changing their economic incentives. Placing fruit at eye level in the cafeteria increased healthy choices, even though nobody was told what to eat, right? The behavior shifted not through persuasion, but through design. Or you may have heard the quote by psychologist Kurt Lewin, who said that behavior is a function of the person and their environment. They call it Lewin's equation, B equals F times P plus E. So in other words, we just don't act in a vacuum. We act in context. And if that context is full of tiny nudges in the right direction, it doesn't take much willpower to stay on track. So if you think of your home as a gentle guide, a pair of walking shoes by the door becomes a passive reminder to go outside. These aren't demands, they're suggestions, little nudges that are just built right there into the landscape of your life. So when you hear the phrase, design your life, don't just think of schedules and planners. Think of surfaces, doorways, light switches and drawers, All of these little things can quietly nudge you into alignment. Your environment doesn't just reflect your habits, it guides them, which means that the more intentional you are with what your space shows you, the less you have to rely on things like remembering or deciding or forcing or willpower. I'm a willful person. I always have been. I push through plenty of things on grit and determination alone. But when it comes to sustaining daily habits, especially in the middle of real life, parenting, working, trying to stay sane, willpower just isn't a reliable system. And I heavily rely on my environment to carry a lot of that weight because most of our behavior doesn't come from what we decide. It comes from what's around us. And the really, really cool thing is that you can change that. It's one of the things that you have total control over. Now, of course, the first step to building a space that supports your habits is clearing off the stuff that's standing in the way, and I do have a free workshop to help you do that amazingly well. It's all about breaking through the clutter using a holistic, feel-good process, and you can find the link for that down in the description. And be sure to join back next week as we continue on this subject of environmental design and the psychology behind our clutter. I'll chat with you then.